Ladies and gentlemen, thrilled to have you here for another epic debate. This is going to be an interesting one, possibly an intense one. We want you to know, though, no matter what walk of life you are coming from, we hope you feel welcome here, and we really do hope you, whether you be Christian, atheist, Democrat, Republican, gay, straight, you name it, we really do hope you feel welcome here. And we are a neutral platform, which means only the debaters ever make a stance on this channel. In other words, I, as the moderator, never take any particular positions. We don't have any after shows in which I take a position saying who won or lost or anything like that. That is up for you to decide in the audience. And so we're going to jump right into this. I think we have a little bit of a lag. Don't worry. The beginning of our streams lately have had a little bit of a lag. Bear with us, and we will be going smooth shortly. So thanks for being here, folks. Want to let you know that both JF and Brenton are linked in the description. So if you're listening and you're like, I like that, I want to hear more, you can hear more. That's why I put those links in the description for you folks. And also, what we're going to do today is we're going to have kind of a 10 to 12 minute flexible opening statement, and the speakers can take as little or as much as they want in order to do that in terms of time, followed by open conversation and then Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to fire your questions into the old live chat. And if you tag me with @ModernDayDebate, it makes it easier for me to be sure I get every single question in that list. Super chats are also an option. So if you do a super chat, you can also, instead of just making, or I should say asking a question during the Q&A, you can actually make a comment during the question and answer, to which the speakers would of course get a chance to respond to. And we ask that you be your regularly friendly selves for that portion. Also, just want to quick say, your super chats will be pushed to the top of the question and answer list. And with that, we are thrilled to have these guests with us today. So what I want to do is just mention a couple of things about their, you could say, credentials or background before we get rolling, is that both of these guys are actually authors. And so Brenton in particular has written, gosh, Brenton, I'm so sorry, I've got a bad memory. Did you say it was...
Yes, I'm a playwright. I've had 7 plays produced in New York City, written quite a few more. I've got a novel that I'm working on that will hopefully be coming out in 2021. And currently I am the author of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, which was published through Scout Comics. Got great reviews, look it up. The 2nd issue is about to come out, and we're going to be fundraising for the 3rd one as well. So definitely look for that. It's really awesome.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. Appreciate that reminder. And then JF as well. JF, if you want to hold up, I think you've got there it is. So, and if you could remind us what the copy or the title and subtitle of that is.
Yes, I'm the author of The Revolutionary Phenotype, the amazing story of how life begins and how it ends. I'm a biologist. I wrote a book, a new theory about the emergence of life. Now, I didn't know that my colleague here has written a book, Snow White. It sounds very interesting. I love the Snow White icon. It is, I don't know what he did with it, but it sounds very fascinating.
Absolutely. And so we are thrilled to have you here. In case you have noticed, folks, if my studio lights up in different colors, basically green means it was a new subscriber that just subscribed, and you'll see in green letters on the bottom of the screen. By the way, the Traditionalist just saw you subscribed. Thrilled to have you with us. And then if it flashes red, that's not a red alert. It's just a super chat coming through, and you'll see the super chat or the name of the super chatter on the screen in red letters. So we're going to jump right into this. We really appreciate these guys being here. So without any further ado, Brenton, the floor is all yours.
Great, thank you. The topic tonight is race and police brutality, and it is a topic that I happen to know intimately. Not as intimately as a member of an ethnic minority group, but instead as a protester. From 2010 to 2014, I was a fairly prominent activist in the Occupy Wall Street movement. I know what it's like to stare down a line of riot cops. I know the fear and uncertainty that comes with being ambushed by black-clad police officers who then corner you in a dark alley and ask in a deeply threatening tone, "Those aren't signs you're carrying, are you?" You know, signs make us nervous. And I know what it's like to bite back the obvious acerbic reply, "Oh, well, officer, you know what makes me nervous?" And I know the gut-wrenching terror that you can only feel when a cop, a man who is supposed to serve and protect, knees you in the spine and throws your ragdoll body into a line of motorcycles. In that moment, as I felt the adrenaline give way to pain, I remember clearly the officer's words. "Stop resisting," he said. Stop resisting. His voice was psychopathically calm as he and several others beat my purposefully limp form into the pavement. I remember the zip ties that closed around my wrists, their sharp plastic bindings cutting off the circulation to my hands. I remember the blood dripping from my elbow, and I remember being marched to one police plaza along with maybe 24 others. As I entered, I saw an impossibly old and stooped Catholic priest in black robes exiting. Later, I had learned that his name was Father Paul, and he had marched with Martin Luther King Jr. He had been arrested earlier that day as part of a contingent of Occupy Faith, fighting for the same thing that we were fighting for. What I imagine many of the people in the streets of Minneapolis and Philadelphia and DC and New York are fighting for right now. All over the country, all over the world, another world is possible. In any case, he was going out and I was going in. And as I sat in the holding cell reflecting on this while I watched my arresting officer write explicit lies about what had happened, lies that would later be exposed on video, leading directly to the case's dismissal. To my knowledge, the officer in question has never faced any sort of repercussions for what he did to me. When I relate this and similar stories to friends and acquaintances of color, particularly the profoundly disturbing emotions brought up by the officer's utterly irrational and undeserved suspicion and hostility towards me, I always get the same reply. Man, for me, it's like that all the time. Now, depending upon how you fall on the right or left, you're probably thinking one of three things right now. If you're more on the right, your response might be, if you don't want trouble, don't break the law. If you're more in the center, you tend to think, yes, that happened, but you and your friends had the misfortune to run into a few bad apples. And if you're more on the left, your response will be an institutional critique, which can run the gamut from, we should do some social reforms, to a cab, comrade, meaning all cops are bastards, which is a bumper sticker slogan. And it is not to say that there are no nuggets of wisdom in each of these statements.
That's normal. I've turned your video off just because the stream is struggling, but I promise we'll be back in action just in a second, so I'll give you the made-up time.
Okay, where did I stop talking? Should I keep going, or?
They've heard you the entire time. The audio has been coming through smooth, but for some reason the video has just been, I don't know what it is. It's been struggling.
Ah, geez, I really okay. So they can hear me right now, is what you're telling me?
They've heard the entire thing. The audio has been good the whole time. It's just that the video has been terrible.
Okay. And it is not to say that there are no nuggets of wisdom in each of these statements, but as with most things in life, the truth does not fit comfortably into human ideological categories, because human perceptions and human minds are necessarily flawed, and therefore all worldviews, no matter what they are subjective and deceiving to their adherents. So I'd like those listening tonight, no matter where you are politically, to approach what I have to say in this discussion with an open mind. Every person, no matter how foolish or stupid, has something they can teach us all. And so we come to two, for lack of a better word, memes, which is to say, elements of culture and systems of behavior that may be passed from one individual to another by means of imitation. In other words, monkey see, monkey do. The first meme is race, and the second is the state. In this context, to understand the first, you must understand the second. So what is the state? To put it simply in the words of Max Weber, renowned German sociologist, philosopher, and noted anti-Marxist, the state is any institution that manages to claim a total monopoly over the justified use of force within a given geographical area. This version of the state is distinct from common parlance in one key feature, namely that it does not include any political institution that exists primarily for the mediation and creation of policy. The state is not the government. It is the military and the police. The difference between the government and the state is the difference between the police officer who threw me into the motorcycle and your local city council. It is the difference between a senator and the man responsible for George Floyd's murder. Contrary to popular belief, the state's primary function is not to protect people, not individuals, not groups, and not ethnicities. The state's function is far more specific. It is, in the words of Max Weber, to secure and defend valuable property. Now, this might sound radical or even shocking to some of you, but our society right now is based upon this very principle. To quote Adam Smith, civil government, as far as it is instituted for the security of property, is in reality instituted for the defense of the rich against the poor, or those who have some property against those who have none at all. Or to go back even further to John Locke, the great and chief end of men's uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property, to which, in the state of nature, many things are left wanting. So the state, which is to say, the people who are currently tasked with and doing an exceptionally poor job of quelling these riots which I might remind you they themselves are responsible for. Their goal at all times, whether the individual actors know it or not, is not to keep the peace. Rather, peace is kept in order to keep the property, which is to say, to serve the interests of the state's primary constituency, the wealthy, the powerful, the elite. Now, why is this important to understand when it comes to race? Well, for two reasons. One, here in America, due to the historical circumstances surrounding the founding of this nation, wealth and social class are currently divided, with very little exception, along those same racial lines. And two, more fundamentally, race itself is primarily a product of the state's quest to remain in power and preserve the property of its primary constituents. Now let that sink in for a moment, because it's a big idea and it is not how most of us are used to thinking about race. Race itself is primarily a product of the state's quest to remain in power and preserve the property of the elite. Everything the state does is to this end. Now, we usually think of race in terms of skin color and facial features, but that is to miss the forest for the trees. In her book, Towards a Political Philosophy of Race, Dr. Falguni Sheth of Emory University puts forth the idea that race as we currently understand and practice it is a construct of sovereign power, which is to say, those who are in charge in a given society are the ones who create race. These are the people whose property the state is primarily interested in protecting. And protecting from who? Well, from you and me, and especially those populations that are perceived to be unruly. In the words of Cersei Lannister, anyone who isn't us. Now, you'll note that I have said perceived, and that's an important word, so make note of it. Populations that are perceived to be unruly are targeted by the state. The state cannot definitively know who is unruly and who is not until they act, just like the state cannot distinguish from someone who's white and someone who's black but looks white enough to pass. It's not about what you actually are. It's about what a cop or a judge thinks you are. So if sovereign power thinks you are unruly, well, mister, you better watch out and stop being so unruly. Now, I identified myself as unruly by doing a protest. And while I was in that group and I was easily identified by my actions, by my means of dress, I was treated like a minority, whether I had done anything or not. However, once the act of protesting was over and I was no longer signaling to the state apparatus that I was unruly, I was no longer perceived as a potential threat, and my relationship with the police completely changed. However, this is because of the way I look, and the way that I look does not inherently communicate to the state that I am a potential danger in our current society. Oftentimes, when people don't think about race very deeply, they imagine that race itself prompts the behavior of the state, which is to say that the state views people of color as inherently unruly because they are truly inherently unruly. But this is simply not the case. There is no evidence whatsoever that anyone who looks a certain way must therefore be compelled to behave in a certain way. You will not find any reputable academic, researcher, or scientist who has ever assigned essential behavior characteristics to the way a person's nose is shaped or the particular character of their hair. Behavior cannot be assigned to race. When you assign a behavior or a propensity for a behavior to race, you are putting the cart before the horse. The reason the state views them as unruly is because they are easily identified from the dominant population by shared physical characteristics. And as all the state does is deploy violence and the threat of violence against perceived threats, it naturally disproportionately attacks those who can be easily identified and isolated. as in it is extremely convenient for the state to view this particular group as unruly because they look different. And since oftentimes people who look different come from very far away or have been subjected to intense institutional abuse in the past, they tend not to have access to valuable property and tend to be underrepresented within the ruling class for whom the state deploys its violence. In short, this misperception becomes a vicious cycle. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is, in a word, racism. And it leads us to moments like the one we are in now. Now, this is a disturbing thought. It is much more comforting to imagine that our social institutions are, on average, functional. That important decisions like who should be let into the country, who should live where, how much they should be paid for their work, and whether or not they should go to jail or be deprived of their possessions or even their life are being made for good and sensible reasons. But humanity and human culture is a work in progress. Whenever you want to destroy someone or make yourself comfortable with someone else destroying them, you must always define them as unpeople, because this erodes compassion and silences the voice of your conscience. I see you there, and you look a little like me, and therefore I think maybe you are people, and maybe you can love. Maybe you feel and experience all the joy and pain and regret that I experience. Maybe we're brothers or sisters, and maybe we can live together. But those people over there across the street, in another state or a city of a different religion, or in Africa or China, I'm not sure they're people, and I'd rather not care about them. So I'm going to imagine that they might be animals or idiots or robots. Those are usually the big three. The point is to sate your bloodlust or quiet your anxiety or serve your vanity or all three at once. You use language and thought to make their lives worth less and your life worth more. And what you don't realize is that as you do that to them, sovereign power does the same thing to you. Kings are always paranoid, always afraid of their people. That's why they sit on a throne with their back to the wall. Because when your back is to the wall, no one can stab you. But if we are to survive on this planet, if we are to thrive on this planet and build a better world for ourselves and for our children, we have to see through this illusion. We have to stop seeing the other tribe as an invader. Because at the moment, the only thing on this planet that can kill us, that can end the human race, is us. And we have to learn to live with ourselves, because if we don't, we'll destroy ourselves through war, through famine, by the spreading of disease, or by the power of a nuclear holocaust. We must live together or we will die alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What we'll do now is I have asked each of you guys, thanks so much, appreciate it. I have asked you guys, sorry about that mistake earlier. I have now asked you guys, if you're able to turn your video on, it's super appreciated, and thanks for doing that already. It basically, the good thing is we didn't lose any audio, but for some reason the start of our streams have been pretty bad lately. But we are now running smooth, and so we will kick it over to JF. Thanks so much, both of you guys, for being here, and JF, the floor is all yours.
All right, that was an impressive introduction. I found myself agreeing with many things in there. So let's start with the agreement. The state exists for defending property, not ensuring safety. I think it's not as dichotomous as Brenton has presented it. In the end, defending property often involves ensuring safety, because if you don't feel safe, there is no consent. If you feel threatened that your business might be destroyed, you are in no position to sign a contract. It's the equivalent of extortion. It's the equivalent of what the mafia does. So very often, defending property goes hand in hand with safety. That being said, it is true. It is one of the great roles of the state. And I believe that the great difference between white civilization and other civilizations in terms of the accomplishment that could be reached, in terms of the complexity of what we could create, relies on this concept of property being implemented at all possible levels. And it's not always been perfect. Of course, there are abuses, but the simple fact that someone can amass a certain amount of money and do whatever he wants with it, I believe is one of the great keys to building a free civilization, a great civilization, because it is by rewarding people who create stuff that others want that capitalism succeeds at distributing its resources, allocating its resources to the most talented. Yes, the elite, as Brenton said, but I use the word elite in a non-negative way here. I want the elite to have the money that they deserve because I want them to create more of the stuff that has proven them to be successful people. Because in capitalism, when you are safe, when you're not forced to go to McDonald's or some other restaurant, when you really choose what you want, then you are essentially rewarding with your money, voting with your money by rewarding the corporations that create what you want. And that's how civilizations advance forward without conscious planning, but based on the free market, one of the great aspects of white civilization. Then Brenton says, race is a construct enforced by the state. I believe that he says for the purpose of implementing some sort of injustice. That I disagree. Race simply is a fact of biology. It is the simple genetic difference that exists between people who have been living separate for long enough. So we have been living separate as white Europeans. We have been living separate long enough from Africans, from Asians, so that we have acquired genetic differences that are widespread and that are not common to everyone in the population, but that are statistically that lead to very different sets of genes, genetic clusters, and phenotypic features that we can observe, among other things, in the facial structure. So race simply existed without governments existing, and it didn't need governments to exist. It was a fact of biology, and this fact, just like other facts, we invent words to point to these facts. The white color of the table here in front of me existed before I could see it. The lengths of light that are indicative of this color existed before humans even existed. But eventually humans developed language to talk about realities, and the language of race in humans are pointing to a reality that predates any pointing toward it, any semantic construct around it. Then Brenton tells the story of his arrest, and he recognized that he was unruly. And so, yes, to someone who gets arrested, I will say, in the case where you have violated the law, I know that you will still feel psychologically oppressed. It's normal. It's society oppressing you. It's because the behavior you were having has been determined to be unlawful. Now, I don't agree with all laws. I'm a libertarian, and in fact, I tend to think that the laws we have in our nations are way too numerous and way too limiting. For instance, I don't want people to get arrested for drug consumptions as long as they do it for themselves and they don't annoy anyone else with it. So I take issue with certain laws. That being said, in general, let's not be surprised that having handcuffs put on you and you being put in a cage will trigger you emotionally. I understand that it does. Now, the good news is that our systems has built into it processes that will lead this bad feeling that you have to be minimized if possible, and if you haven't violated the law. So Brenton was telling the story, he was eventually released, and okay, I can believe that it was an error in this case, and we must minimize to the best extent we can, we must minimize these errors. That being said, yes, there will be errors made by the system. What I want is a system where we can correct the error as fast as possible and just say, I'm sorry if you were mistreated, Brenton, and I'm sorry that our society is like this. That is too bad, and I don't stand for this. Now, Brenton says minorities are disadvantaged in the system due to their lack of property. They may be disadvantaged. I mean, if you are in a court of law, you don't have the means to pay for a lawyer. That could be a disadvantage, and I would want to rule out as much as possible that kind of disadvantage. I would want everyone in the nation to have due process. That being said, our debate tonight was titled around a much more specific subject, which is police brutality and the question of race and whether there is racial bias in the interventions of policemen. And I guess that this is where I want to go and I want to express that my view is that although there is police malfeasance and there are police errors, right now the evidence doesn't point to any racial bias emerging from white policemen mistreating more Black people. What we have in terms of numbers, and the studies in this domain, 99% of them are just, they don't lead to a clear answer because they don't use the right methods. The problem is if you calculate just by raw number in the US, how many people get shooted by the police by race? What you end up finding is that there are still today more white people who are being shot to death by the police in the United States. I'm looking at the Statista website from 2017 to 2020. In 2019, for example, 370 white persons were shot by the police versus 235 Black people. And so in terms of raw number, clearly white people are still killed more than Black people. Now, of course, the argument being given to this is, well, Blacks are overrepresented. If Black people represent, I don't know, anywhere from 10 to 17% of the population in some locality, they shouldn't be at 235, it should be lower. And the answer to this is yes, there is a slight overrepresentation of Black people in the people shot by the police in 2019, for instance. Now, the problem is, for approaching this with a scientific mind, we have to ask, are Black people just finding themselves in situations where the police have to shoot to save their lives? And the fact is that, yes, what we find when we look at data is that Black people commit more crime. They find themselves on crime scenes more often. They resist more to police arrest, and they put the police in situations where they have no other choice but to shoot. And that's why we have this slight overrepresentation. In fact, Al-Type has done the calculation in a video 2 days ago on his YouTube site, and he concludes that Black people are not even represented to the level at which they kill policemen in these statistics. That means Black people on average kill more policemen than policemen kill Black people if you do the calculation by population per capita. Now we can look at other studies. Some studies, for example, will create laboratory environments where literally the same situation will be constructed, but it's a virtual situation. So policemen are in the lab, they have a fake gun, and they have to respond to a situation. And sometimes it's a Black person, sometimes it's a white person, and they can measure the delay in reaction time according to a situation that demands pulling out your gun and shooting. What we find is that policemen are actually more trigger happy. They are quicker to shoot when the person proposing a threat is white. It's because they think twice when he's Black. They try to process the scene. They take a little more time to process. And so both in laboratory environment and in real life environment, what we find is that there is no massive detectable racial bias in the way police shoot suspects. And then we have to affirm that, yes, police brutality may be a point-by-point problem. And I acknowledge the problem, for example, in the way George Floyd has been killed by a policeman. I think that the knee pin to the ground was unnecessarily long. And I think that the same move may be done for 10 seconds could have been defensible in certain situations. But I think that the video we've seen and the claim that the pin was held for up to 8 minutes leads me to think that in the case of George Floyd, there may have been malfeasance, but we need to learn to distinguish malfeasance from policemen, which we should all combat, and whether there is a racial question on it. I don't think that currently there is a racial question as far as the national data goes. And even in the case of George Floyd, I don't think that there's any sign that this stemmed from a racial bias. So as far as the riots that have now emerged around the George Floyd death, I will say, I think that they are based on a false conception around facts, a false conception that has been pushed forward by the leftist media, which has now found a kind of disgusting alliance with communism and SJWism and Black Lives Matter. Weirdly, we now have the communists like Brenton hand in hand with the CEOs of the tech companies and the great media. In the end, you guys have won. Congratulations, communists. That being said, what we are presented is a single case of police brutality, but when we have a wider look at the data, this happens to white people also. Still, more white people today get shot by the police. And I'm looking at a case, for example, of Justin Diamond. You can Google her, a beautiful white woman with blonde hair, gets shot by a policeman. There was no riot for her. And so what we have right now is a selective media attention being driven toward one case, being given a racial dimension that it probably doesn't have. At least I've not seen any evidence suggesting this. And so we are fooling the populations. That being said, I'm not so much against the riots. I actually, I'm against violence. I'm against the rioting, but I'm not so much against the protest, because in the end, those protests, they put two of my enemies head to head. The communists in the street and the state, the police force, and Donald Trump and the entire state apparatus. So I'm glad that these people are going at it and costing each other enormous amounts of effort, time, and money. And for once, I can relax a little bit as a right-winger, seeing two of my great enemies lose so much time going at each other. And every flashbang that is thrown on the street, every smoke screen that is pulled, every act of police violence against the protesters and against the rioter, that's all money that I'm glad to see the state wasting instead of going after me, instead of impeding on my rights. So the riots, I think that pragmatically, I like them. I like the fact that they happen. I like their social consequences. Of course, I don't support the violence. And ultimately, I think that these riots and protests are based on a false factual processing of the world. That is what I had to say for my intro.
You got it. And with that, we'll jump right into the open conversation. So thanks for your questions so far, folks. Got them in the list so far for the Q&A, which will come up in about maybe like 45 minutes or so, roughly. So with that, gentlemen, thanks so much. The floor is all yours.
Okay, so to jump into that, there were so many lies, half-truths, and misconceptions in that statement that I don't even quite know where to begin. So first off, we'll go with the easy thing. White. The table was white before you saw it. No, it wasn't. Now, you even corrected yourself slightly in that you acknowledged that it was the rays that your eyeballs were identifying as white. Color is created by the human brain. It is our way of involving ourselves in our environment. We even find ourselves in situations where color, based upon either specific situations or cultures or the individual rods and cones in someone's eyes, will change. Everybody remembers the blue or white dress that was viral for a while, and nobody could tell. Everybody thought it was a video, but in fact, it was just a picture of a dress that would identify either as blue or white, depending upon the person looking at it. There's also the fact that if you go back and you read the Iliad, they will refer to the sea as wine-colored, both in the Iliad and the Odyssey, and this is because the ancient Greeks had no word for blue. So they did not see the sea as blue. And there are even cultures that we find that have no distinction between blue and green, and people from those cultures cannot see the distinction between blue and green. So much of our perceptions, and that's why I emphasize that, are just that, perceptions. They seem like material parts of reality, but they are not. Now, I could go into your stuff with capitalism, but that's off the thing. Race is objectively not a fact of biology. This is held by every single reputable source that you can find. It is not there. I mean, I could read you quotes all day. Racial pharmacologists fail in efficacy and safety. We've got science is based on generalizability, consistency, and reproducibility. Race does not encompass that. Alan Goodman, professor of biological anthropology. We've got, we discourage the use of race as a proxy for biological similarity and support efforts to minimize the use of categories of race and ethnicity in clinical medicine, maintaining focus on the individual rather than the group, from Stanford University. Time and time again, Nature magazine, the entire scientific consensus is against you on the matter of race. So why do you continue to advance false narratives here?
Well, let's first address your first point. You talked about perceptions. I've never said that perceptions are stable and that our eyes have an objective determination of the exact color that we see around us. That being said, if you have the same eye receptors, if those people that you're referring to in the past literature had eyes to like us, they would see the ocean blue, no matter whether
No,
they
not
have the
eyes
word
like
for
us.
it.
The eyes aren't different. It is the culture that is different, which is also why you could train people to see the color in the dress change.
We got what you said. What I'm telling you is that it's not because you don't have the word for something that you can affirm that the qualitative subjective experience of color is indicated by the word. We don't have access to people's feeling, let alone people's feeling 2,000 years ago. So we don't know how they saw color. There could be some difference because there could have been
from the way they describe things that we see as color.
Just to be sure that
you won't understand how someone sees color based on their words. They could be using a totally different word for blue and you wouldn't realize. So anyways, this is the question of the hard problem of consciousness, and I suggest you educate yourself on it before making that kind of claim in front of a PhD in neuroscience. That being said,
PhD in neuroscience, you are not qualified to talk about what you're qualifying. Your PhD in neuroscience, your what was it? Your thesis was on the electrical impulses of lampreys. Your work was with laboratory monkeys, teaching them to play video games and shit. You are not qualified to talk about humans, particularly not because you were working with monkeys when humans came from apes.
I've been working with humans in cognitive psychology for 2 years at Duke University. Well, you can see the papers. Type Gariepi JF.
Yes, I can.
On PubMed.
I did, and I looked at them, and none of them were in any way related. They were very interesting. Again, I think it's cool to teach monkeys to play video games, but they were very interesting. But they are not. You are not qualified in the specific area that you claim to be qualified in. Like, if you wanted to do this, you should have measured in neuropsychology, or you should have gone into sociology.
Suppose that what you say is true. What does that make you?
I mean, that puts us on more or less even footing. And also, that would be an ad hominem argument.
We're even footing because you're there in New York writing plays. That gives you a superb authority on talking about the brain. Now, okay, I'm skipping on this part of the conversation because it's so ridiculous. I think my crowd is already laughing.
Your crowd can laugh if they want to because you fooled them. You literally do not have the qualifications that you claim that you have. You have enough qualifications to trick, say, Jeffrey Epstein into paying you $25,000. Well, trick or get him to do that, you know, and you have the power to trick these people who don't know any better, who don't actually know people who work in the biomedical field like I do. And they follow you in your show.
I'm not surprised to hear a communist make arguments by qualification.
Ad hominem.
You're always looking for a better qualification, for an authority to follow.
Ad hominem.
And in fact, when it doesn't exist, you want to create it. You want to create a bigger state to tell you how to wipe your
ad hominem.
fucking
None
ass.
of this has anything to do with the conversation that we're having here.
What I'm telling you is I don't care about qualifications. I don't care.
Okay, you don't have to care about qualifications, but you definitely are not qualified. Listen, what you are doing is you used a false appeal to authority to pull more authority to yourself. That is not
appeal to any authority. I don't appeal to any authority. Okay, my arguments are as good as they are when I lay them out. But as long as you don't let me speak, I can't lay them out. Let's talk about race. My statement on race is that I follow the Google definition of race, which is a difference between groups of people that is inherited. These people that you talk about, these anthropologists who deny race, they're probably working with a different definition, because what we know for sure And that's no matter whether you want to use.
You will never find a qualified anthropologist use the term race denial.
I do want to.
Can I make my case?
Go.
Okay, whatever you want to call this, call it race, call it letters of DNA, call it whatever you like. People differ at the genetic level, and it's observable in their facial feature, their skin, their behavior. And it's inherited in the sense that if two black people make a baby, it's most likely going to be a black baby. And if two white people make a baby, it's most likely going to be a white baby who will carry the genes that will allow 23andMe to even tell him if his ancestors are from Finland or Russia or Italy. So there is an inherited genetic difference that qualifies groups of people on Earth, that forms clusters of differences on Earth.
There is a genetic thing, but this is caused by cherry picking because we look for specific characteristics in genes to find specific people. You only find the race when you specifically look for the race based upon the characteristics that we have designed for the race. Again, this is standard science. Literally everyone agrees with this. You are one of the only ones who doesn't. And the only reason you're doing, well, no, I won't speculate on why you're doing that because that's not pointless. But also, heritability does not necessarily. Yeah. Okay.
You say it's cherry picking. It's not. Rosenberg's article, for example, used a K-cluster algorithm that didn't know about race. It takes the genes of people and it says, yes, these people are different from these people. It's an algorithm. It's as objective as it gets.
An algorithm is programmed by a human. Depending upon what that human has going on in their head at the time, they will set the number of categories, and that can also set that off. Now, heritability also does not necessarily mean a direct genetic cause. It's not.
Yes, it is agnostic. The only thing you can do to a clustering algorithm is give it a number. And they gave it all numbers. They gave it 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Ridiculous.
7. And what we find is that no matter in how many groups you want to divide humanity, there is genetic structure across human population.
Of course, there's genetic structure across human population. There's genetic structure across individuals.
That's what
that doesn't mean anything. Yeah, okay. So you call race just evolution. Evolution is race, in your opinion.
Yep. Well,
okay.
No, I mean,
then what you've done, what you've done essentially is you've done the racial equivalent of Spinoza's God. When everything is God, the idea of God doesn't matter. And the same thing when everything is race, the idea of race doesn't matter. It is about creating specific categories among people. And there are no reliable taxonomical conclusions that have ever been drawn by anyone in academia, never by anyone in the research community, and never by anyone in the science community that is reputable. All of the research that we have says that race is an illusion. It does not exist, at least not on the genetic level.
Rose, you're not including Rosenberg's article in there because clearly
because one study from Rosenberg's article, again, there is the vast conclusion of all of the scientists together. So even if you have this one article, which I have not personally seen, even if you have this one Rosenberg's article, what happens is you just jump on that and go, this is the key study. That's not how science works, and you damn well should know that.
It's actually how science works. The great beauty of science is that one study properly made dominates 1,000 studies that are not properly made.
No. Because the studies have to be replicated.
If you have your anthropologist communist saying, "Oh my God, we can't speak about race," I suggest we don't speak about race.
Not an anthropologist,
I just got bullied by a fat beer drinking communist.
Ad hominem.
Of course you're gonna have your articles saying we can talk about race. In the end, the question is, did any of these anthropologists
No one said we can't talk about race either. And by the way, when you were... Well, of course, everybody looked into 23andMe. 23andMe is still consistent with the idea that race does not exist on the genetic level. Again, it's what you are specifically looking for, specific markers. For instance, take sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia is common in East Africans and also Greeks and Italians and people around that trade route because those specific markers had to deal with immunity or at least resistance to malaria. And when you pull people from Africa that are not in those regions, they don't have that. And the same thing is when they come to America, they don't have that. Now, you talked about race and people of color, and specifically black people, doing more of the crime. The fact is that these statistics are lies, and they are also very they're also very easy to misrepresent. For instance, I can say as a fact, a statistical fact, that the average American has one breast and one testicle. That's a statistical fact. The reason why is 50% of Americans are male and about 50% of Americans are female. 2 breasts, 2 testicles. You average them together, boom, you get one breast and one testicle. There are liars, there are damn liars, and there are statisticians, and that's the first thing they will teach you in any college statistics class. Now, when we look at the statistics, in other words, and take more stuff into consideration, for instance, the exoneration rates, you find that black people are more often accused of and arrested for crimes, but also black people are more often exonerated of crime. 47% of all exonerations are black prisoners. Judging by the exonerations, innocent black men are 7 times more likely to be convicted of murder than innocent white people. And it goes down in every single crime. So that like 1350 bullshit that people start saying, it is all just manipulating the data. It is taking a tiny piece and lying by omission, and dumb people get caught by it.
This is quite stunning. You are saying that there is more exoneration for black people, therefore the justice system is unfair toward black people.
Correct.
Because this reminds me of the All-Type video showing that in fact black juries are more likely to, for the same case, and those were virtual cases, so they could control the details to be exactly the same. Black juries are actually more likely to find black people non-guilty.
Yeah.
So they have a racial bias for their own race. Correct. Versus white people who
Correct.
don't appear to have a racial bias at all. And so the exoneration that you're talking about may very well be explained by this study.
Have you ever covered a trial, or you ever been in court?
Yes, I've been in court. I've been watching
processes. You were. I remember the thing in Texas with the girl. Okay, I covered a trial. I covered the Cecily McMillan trial, and I'm familiar with jury selection. I'm familiar. I even went and interviewed her in Rikers Island. So I've seen this process that we have with the justice system. So first of all, the idea that black people, if they sentence black people more, or if they're more harsh as a jury towards black defendants, that is identity politics, that they shouldn't be. It is a system, and the system has individual human actors working within it. The system is biased against black people. The individual humans in it may or may not be biased against black people. But the fact of the matter is both black people are being over-policed, overcharged, over-sentenced, and then when we do take the time to go through the process of figuring out, oh, did this actually happen? Whoa, turns out they are massively, more often than not, put in prison for the wrong reasons, because they are innocent.
Well, it's kind of a Schrödinger racial bias here. It's a bias that seems to exist in the black box that Brenton keeps reaffirming, despite every time that we try to look at it and see that if we find anything, it's a black for black bias, which is a positive bias.
If we find anything, what are you talking about?
Well, because let me talk about the studies. First, there is Law and Human Behavior, number 6, December 2005, a study called Racial Bias in Mock Juror Decision-Making, a meta-analytic review of defendant treatment. What we find is that the only bias present is for black people, and it is that they are more lenient toward themselves.
So what's the study and who's publishing it?
It is the study, the authors are Tara L. Mitchell, Ryan M. Ha, Jeffrey E. Pfeiffer, and Christian A. Meissner. It's called Racial Bias in Mock Juror Decision-Making, a Meta-Analytic Review of Defendant Treatment. Now we get to the, are white policemen more likely to shoot black defendants or black perpetrators? We have the study called The Reverse Racism Effect by Lois Jane, Stephen M. James, and Brian J. Villa, a study that establishes that in laboratory conditions, policemen are actually more trigger happy on white people. And so this
you mentioned that.
This
By the way,
supposed
I had
racial
an answer
bias,
for that.
every time we try to see it, it's not there.
Yeah. No,
And
no.
so
You
where
found
is it?
individual instances of other data that may point in the other direction. Because again, it is about the overall, what the data all says overall, not what an individual study says. Now, you talk about about people being more likely to shoot when they see white targets appear than black targets. The fact is that the human eye, and I know this because I work with visual stuff, is lazy. It is attracted to empty white space. So of course, a police officer would have an easier time making out a white outline on a shooting course than a black outline, just because it's harder to see. And you see all of these studies, what winds up happening.
Brenton.
Yeah.
I didn't know you would go solo as to point to my facial features as being empty. It's like,
no, I'm not talking about that.
It's extremely racist.
I'm talking about the targets that they're going into, and you damn well know that.
I'm taking issue.
Okay, you go over there and you cry. I'm literally as white as you. So it's like, it's one of the most ridiculous things to say. Yeah, I'm actually probably whiter than you.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I've said what I had to say. Now, there was one last point we didn't address from Brenton's intro. He says, if we are to thrive and survive on this planet, we have to give up this delusion. We have to stop seeing the other tribe as the enemy. To be clear about my worldview, I don't see any other tribe as the enemy. I think that there are people who live better among themselves, and there are people whose behavior are not compatible to living together. And in the best case we can imagine for the future, the people who are annoying to other people could live separate. I'm thinking of a world in which communists could live among communist nations. I would make a space for them on planet Earth. All I'm asking really is a path to self-determined, so that the communist doesn't feel entitled to living around me. Would you say you disagree with this? Would you say that you don't want me to live alone, separate from the world, and that it's causing a problem for you if I create the space for myself and whoever I want to bring with me?
I've heard this argument before, and the fact of the matter is that I don't care if you individually decide to go off into the woods and live by yourself. In fact, I think that would be much more healthy for you. So I am very happy about that. But the point is that this is never really what you're lying when you say that, because you support an ethno-state. And when you support an ethno-state, what happens is that you support a military and police, as we've established what the state is, that sees its primary duty as to do violence against those that do not fit into that ethnicity. What winds up happening is, and also, by the way, when communities rope themselves off from other communities and they try to do this, what happens is that because of the way the state functions, if it is in this type of idea of state structure, what will occur is the state will go and find someone else within that community. You even heard it with Tara McCarthy in your debate with Destiny, where Tara McCarthy came in and she said, okay, well, we're first going to start with the people who are illegal immigrants. And then we're going to start with the legal immigrants and we're going to get rid of them. And we're going to keep going and keep going. And I guarantee you, down that road is nothing but death and misery. Because once you get rid of all the non-white people, guess what? Well, then the other white people don't start looking not so white. And you go down and down and down until there's just one guy in the middle of a room, because this is a pathological death cult that you're involved in.
Well, you're arguing for another person here, Tara McCarthy.
I'm arguing for you because you said Tara said nothing wrong and does nothing wrong. I'm using an example of the thought process that you and Tara McCarthy share. And I'm doing it.
I said Tara McCarthy said nothing wrong.
Yeah, you said she said that when you were debating Destiny before she came in on that.
In a given context, I may say she said
in a given context when
Destiny.
She was talking. Yeah, he played the clip exactly where she talked about kicking out first the illegal immigrants, then the legal immigrants, then doing what she could to people. And also, by the way, you say you want to be left alone, but then you're there like every night reaching out to people on your live stream. You don't want to be left alone. You want a community.
Oh, I want a community of people who want to live with me without taxing me. So that disqualifies the communist. I'm not imposing my YouTube channel to anyone. The people who are with me every night,
right? But you're being taxed.
People who want to be with
you're
me.
being taxed where you are, right? You live up in
yes.
Canada. Yeah.
Yes, and so what I'm asking is for a space of liberty where we could be headed, perhaps Antarctica, but a place where we are not subjected to laws that do not advantage us and that are to our disadvantage and that are foreign, to be honest, to our history as white Europeans.
Okay, so first off, again, you don't actually have a history of white Europeans. Every single one of us is related to just about every single one of us on this planet. And it's because, again, ancestry goes what's the word? It goes exponentially. You have 2 parents and 4 grandparents and 8 great-grandparents, and it keeps going back and keeps going back and keeps getting bigger until the number gets so big, it's more than anybody who's ever existed on this planet. Every single one of us is a direct descendant of the example that's usually used for this is not Lao Tzu, but the other guy, Confucius. Every single one of us is a direct descendant of Confucius. We all have a most recent common ancestor of about 1,000 years ago. And everyone who passed on their genes somewhere between 50 and 1400 BC, we are literally the descendants of all of them. Because again, you have to keep marrying and everything keeps getting shifted around. And this is another reason why race doesn't exist on the genetic level. Now, it might exist in some isolated populations like uncontacted tribes, but it certainly does not exist in the world as we have it today. Go back even just a couple hundred years, you'll have 10 generations, you will have 1 million ancestors. Beyond that, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So you have African ancestors, you have Chinese ancestors, you have ancestors of every race, creed, nationality ever.
Well, this is quite stunning, and it's time for a biology course here. First, Brenton says...
Biology course for the unqualified person.
You have more ancestors than people who ever lived on the planet.
No, mathematically...
That is a ridiculous statement.
That is not the statement that I made. I said mathematically, once you get to a point where there are more ancestors than there are available, you're counting the same person twice or 3 times or 1 million times, because once again, the families come together. Then there's also what's called, I think, line collapse, where cousins marry cousins and the lines get smaller. What's happening again is that you say people are being isolated. They're not isolated. Each group on the earth breeds with the group immediately next to it. You have sex and you have families with the people that you know and you can talk to. And in fact, genetics is more distributed along language lines than it is along racial lines, because obviously you're having families with the people that you can talk to. These genetics get moved, the version of it, like the metaphor for it, is a bucket chain. You got a bucket of water, you hand it to the person next to you, that person hands it to the person next to them, and again, it spreads out over the entire globe. The races that you are seeing right now are the result of very recent ancestry, with certain traits being passed down and certain ones not being, again, which is why race does not exist on the genetic level, and you can have more in common genetically with someone of a different race than your own.
That remains to be proven. That being said, my initial statement was, I am descending from a white European history. And you can see the dishonesty.
History is an idea.
Can I speak? Because I've let you speak, so let me speak.
All right, fair enough.
You can see the dishonesty necessary to reach the conclusion of Brenton. He has to deny the whole 80,000 years of the separate living, relatively separate, not fully separate, but separate living between Europe and Africa and Asia, such that today Europeans find themselves with lots of Neanderthal genes, for example, which are completely absent from African Americans. Or
not
from
completely
people
absent,
who are
just less likely to have them.
From Africa. Almost completely absent, unless they've reproduced with a white person in the last 400 years. So there is distinction. It is detectable. That's why 23andMe doesn't get sued.
Because individuals are detectable. Because there is diversity within the human population, but it is not diversity based on race.
My statement, I am an individual, white European, with a white European history. My ancestors were white Europeans who lived in white Europeans nation, most of them, and they have been exposed to a different type of life than the Africans. And I want to honor that type of life and sustain it and continue it into the future. That's all I'm asking for. You can have all sorts of constructs in your head about race or not race. I don't give a shit, to be honest. All I'm asking for is for the liberty to choose who I have sex with, who I reproduce with, and to keep going forward into the future with my descendants, which I identify as being white European. That's it.
Yeah. All right. So you need to check out the paper, Genetic Similarities Within and Between Human Populations by D.J. Witherspoon, S. Wooding, A.R. Rogers, E.E. Mancini, W.S. Watkins, M.A. Batzer, and L.B. Lord. And before, you know, you and your old people go, Lewontin's fallacy, because really the way you use that is it is a thought-terminating cliche. You just say it like how libertarians say roads. They don't actually have an answer for who's going to build the roads. So they say roads and just make fun of it because they don't want to change their opinion because they are too weak-minded to actually change when new data comes in. But I highly recommend you read that study where it specifically, and it uses Lewontin's research, it takes Lewontin's fallacy into account and still comes to the conclusion that race is not genetically significant. And this is not something that we can use taxonomically. Now, if you think you've got some research that proves otherwise, I look forward to seeing your peer-reviewed study up on here. I mean, you know, you said when you left your university, you said you left because you had more questions about science going on. Okay, well, why haven't you done any science since then? Like, I don't see any studies coming out.
Here's my study, a complete theory of the emergence of life. If you want one day,
that's
we can
not a study,
debate
that's
it.
a
If
book.
you think, well, it's a theory.
You don't have a peer review on it.
I'm a theoretical biologist who thinks about the emergence of life, and I'm absolutely capable. But I'm absolutely capable of reviewing myself. And if you don't like it,
you can't peer review yourself.
I'm not peer reviewing myself. I'm reviewing myself, and I'm right. So if you disagree with it, instead of making appeal to authorities, why don't you write your critique of the revolutionary phenotype? This is a major contribution to biology.
You made this mistake
By the
before.
way, you're going to die and you're not going to have contributed something as important to planet Earth whenever it is that you die. So I've done this when I was 30 years old. That's already better than what you will accomplish in your entire life.
You are barking up the wrong tree if you think I have a fear of mortality. Dude, I'm a Buddhist.
Now,
I don't even think individuals exist. So obviously I'm not worried about my own death. Now,
there I can see the source of the denial of race here when you don't even think that you exist. But I have
no. Get me wrong. I exist. It's just, and I exist as me. I just also exist as everything else and as everyone else does.
Yeah, the cantaloupes and the pears. Yeah, I've heard it.
I have no idea what you're talking about with
on the Witherspoon et al. Study, genetic similarities within and between human populations. This is typically a study that I cite myself because it's a study that finds that at a certain number of loci, you can identify populations as being different. So it's
because
a study that to me confirm my concept of race. Let me cite here the abstract. Yet, sufficient genetic data can permit accurate classification of individuals into populations. So I'm satisfied that this study proves my point.
It definitely does not, because it goes on to say, let me find the conclusion there. Yeah, so I will find this, but in the time when we're doing this, because I brought this up in the S&M debate, the fact of the matter is that when it talks about using thousands of clusters and stuff, or thousands of loci, what it's talking about is when you pull out far enough, you obviously find the clusters that people normally associate with various populations. And also, the populations in here is not using race, it's using geography. Race and geography are not the same thing. So obviously, when science is going in there and it's finding people and saying, okay, it's talking about where they are on the planet as opposed to, or where their recent ancestors were on the planet, as opposed to what race they are. Which is, again, why scientists don't use the term race.
I mean, race and geography are two different concepts, but they are proxies of each other.
No, they're not proxies of each other.
If your ancestors have been living mostly in Africa, we can predict that you will have dark skin, relatively dark skin. It's as simple as
Here we are at the conclusion. And yes, obviously you might have relatively dark skin because you have the genome for that, because that is adapted to an African environment.
That's what I call race.
Yeah, but you call race, again, that's not race. That's not how we understand it.
Let's call it human structure in the genome.
The fact that given enough genetic data, individuals can be correctly assigned to their populations of origins is compatible with the observation that most human genetic variation is found within populations, not between them. It is also comparable with our findings that even when using most distinct populations are considered and hundreds of loci are used, individuals are frequently more similar to members of other populations than to members of their own population. Thus, caution should be used when using geographic or genetic ancestry to make inferences about individual phenotypes. The fact is that humans, and compared to other species on the planet, we have one of the shallowest gene pools on the planet. Just about every other species is more genetically diverse than we are. We are one of the most similar organisms there is.
Yeah, I mean, there is something to say about diversity here, and I'm aware of this effect of diversity within population being greater. What I explain on this is that simply our conceptions of race are not precise enough. When we say white people, we're really talking about 12, 13 genetic clusters. We can take the Eastern Europeans, we can take the Italians. They will cluster differently.
What is the use of this?
Just to point out, when they reach this conclusion, it's with too wide of a label. What it really reveals is that you can have two populations within Africa that are more different than you are with Eastern Europeans. But of course, you are different from Eastern Europeans. And if you cluster properly, if you use the right resolution.
We do have to switch maybe more if we just kind of redirect slightly more back to the police brutality in the context
that's a
of
good
race.
point. We're getting into the weeds on this, and there's a lot of lies here. Okay, so back into the police brutality.
We might have just a few more minutes to cover that. I'd say maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll go into Q&A.
Okay, that sounds good to me. So this is what I'll say. From when I was arrested, I do remember this. Out of the 24 or so protesters that came in, only one of us was black. We had all been arrested for doing the exact same thing. While we were being held in the jail, one of us was selected to be sent to the tombs and was kept overnight in much harder lockdown. Guess who it was, and guess what they looked like? Was the black guy.
I have to guess. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did
it was a rhetorical
resist?
question. No, the cops were being racist. He did the exact same thing any of the rest of us did, but he was the one who was taken for special punishment. Similarly,
but he did resist.
No, he didn't resist.
No, he did not resist at all.
No, because what happens when you're kettled by? Yeah, no, he's not an idiot. If he actually had resisted, he would have been charged with assaulting a police officer in much the same way I didn't resist when the police were attacking me, because I'm not an idiot. I let them beat me up because I know that if I do anything to defend myself against them, they will use that and they will drop a felony charge against me. That's what happened to Cecily McMillan. She was in the park while Occupy was being cleared. A cop came up behind her and grabbed her breast. With not knowing who it was, not knowing that it was a cop, she threw back her arm like this and just clocked him in the eye a little bit with the elbow. He had a little shiner. They tried to put her in prison for 7 years. So no, he definitely did not resist. He was kettled with the same people that were arrested with me, and he was not being subject to a larger charge. What happened was they just decided, this guy's black. He probably doesn't have a lot of money. He probably doesn't have a dad or connections. Let's hurt him a little bit more so he'll never goes out and does this again. Now, we want to talk. Yeah. Now we want to talk a little bit about police brutality. And, here's the thing. It's not just about race with regard to police brutality. That is a component of it. But also police brutality happens because of how officers are trained and selected for. And I know this because of Captain Ray Lewis, who is a former Philadelphia police captain that was arrested with Occupy Wall Street. He and I are friends, and we actually asked him, what would you do if you could change the way the police work? And he said the most important thing that happens is they give a psychological test to everyone who wants to be a police officer. And it asks questions. It determines essentially kind of like your Myers-Briggs personality type, but it grades you on a scale of sensitive to hard ass. Technical terms there, but that's how he described it. The police forces select people that are more on the hard ass side, because they expect if they select people on the sensitive side, those people will get overwhelmed with the job, because you see a lot of bad stuff, a lot of suicides. It's a tough job. It's not a very dangerous job comparatively, but it is a tough one to be a cop. And you will quit, and they will have wasted the money to train you. The problem is when you select someone that's a little more on the hard ass side, the act of being a cop hardens you. It makes you worse. It makes you more of a hard ass. And so if you take someone who's already a hard ass, by the time they spend a few years on the force, they're a freaking Terminator. And then they go out and they stomp on somebody's neck and kill them. And then millions of dollars of damage from riots, from lawsuits happen. So really what needs to happen here is these police organizations need to stop the way that they are selecting and stop looking at the things as obvious and immediate short-term goals, and look more in the term of long-term goals in how they hire, select, and train their police officers.
I think this is interesting. I'm wondering, do you think there was a problem with police brutality in the USSR?
Oh, absolutely. It's the cops.
Yeah, because ultimately I find myself, what makes you a communist exactly? Do you want police? Do you want a strong law in your communist state?
I mean, I'm barely okay, so when you say communist, what you're usually talking about is you mean tanky. You mean like a Marxist, like my friend Caleb, or even more than that. You mean like somebody like a hardline Stalinist. I am an anarcho-communist, or in other words, you could say a libertarian socialist. This is not a Marxian philosophy, and this is not a philosophy that comes out of the Soviet state. This is a philosophy that was born in the French Revolution. Following the work of Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Peter Kropotkin, Emma Goldman, Bakunin. We are essentially if you look up, Voltairine de Cleyre did a great essay about that, where she talked about the difference between the state communist and the anarchist communist. And she said essentially the anarchist communist is the person who is a man first and a communist second. So, what ideas that I have that are communistic, and like, for instance, I don't think we should use money. I don't think that's a good idea, because money is a fiction anyway. And it's an intelligence system that we've grown beyond as a society. Those are, one, ideas that I'm not super tied to. I'm not highly ideological when I approach things. It's why, if you ask me, if you say, are you right or left? I'll say I'm neither. I'm an anarchist. I tend to agree a little bit more with the left and the far left, but that's also because, look at who's in the White House and look at what's currently happening as a result. So yeah, when you're talking about me as a communist, what I'm looking to do is to maximize everyone's positive and negative freedom by identifying and destroying concentrations of unjustified authority in the world, unjustified power. I don't have a problem with justified power, and I have a number of ideas about how we might go about doing that. But yeah, that's the kind of communist I am. It's probably very different, and you'll notice I used a lot of classical libertarian arguments in my opening statement. Because
it's fascinating, because in the end it means we're not so different, me and you. I've just come to an understanding that is different from yours, that I understand that as long as you give money to the state, they will oppress you. And so I have a tool out of this situation. You don't seem to have one, because you don't seem to understand that by allowing the state to grow infinitely, like it's doing in the US right now, you are giving them the baseball bat with which they will beat you.
How am I allowing the state to grow infinitely?
Well, if you look
they didn't ask me.
The size, well, you support them in being a leftist, essentially. And
no, I'm anti-state.
You're anti-state. Okay, so you would combat, for example, taxation. You're against taxation?
I don't worry as much about taxation because money isn't real. For instance, if the state was not taxing you, for instance, let's say there was Bitcoin or whatever, what would happen economically is the prices of what you pay for would rise to the threshold of essentially what you're paying with money with your money being taxed. When you take taxes away from, say, gas prices or something, if you have to pay, they just raise the price to what that is, because they know you're already willing and able to pay that price. Capitalism always goes from they will always charge the most they can possibly get for a service, no matter what. And the only thing that brings that down is competition.
Well, I think it's the conclusion, but perhaps one day Brenton can understand that the policeman who's beating him is being paid, that the money is not fictional. It's allowing the acquisition of resource to this policeman. And
Hang
that
on.
if you want to, just one last word.
We should go
if you want to stop the police state, defund it. Once Brenton can understand that, we can become
You can't defund it because the government can just print as much money as they want.
Oh, gosh. 2 seconds. I've got just realized I'm not plugged in. Go ahead, carry on with that point, and I'll be back in like literally 8 seconds to plug in.
We're way off topic here, and I want to point out that you and I probably could come together and talk about like libertarian ideas and stuff. The issue is, and we're not far apart necessarily on that. I mean, you're a right libertarian, but like we can talk about that. However, we are 150,000 miles apart when it comes to your race ideas. I find them disgusting and incredibly dangerous. And actually, I see it as a Buddhist. I actually see it as a religious law that for me to oppose them. Now, if we want to get back onto like what we were talking about with regards to the government, this is a fact. And Alan Greenspan admitted this on the floor of Congress. And you've even seen evidence of it with the bailouts when they're always saying, we don't have the money to do this. We can't send the money. We don't have the money. The fact of the matter is that with a fiat currency, the government is able to print as much money as it wants to fund whatever it wants. And it doesn't even create inflation as long as that money is printed within and within proportion to a growing economy, which is another reason why you see these budgets go bigger and bigger and bigger, and why, famously, deficits don't matter. The United States deficit absolutely doesn't matter. Now, if the United States was printing money and handing it over to China, that would be different. But any money that is printed and spent domestically within a modern nation state with a fiat currency goes immediately back into the economy because, again, a government deficit, when a government owes its people money and pays its people money, guess what? When the government is in the red, the people are in the black, or would be if corporations weren't stealing all that.
I absolutely agree with this. I agree with this. Essentially, white people are improving the world by being more and more productive every year, and we get
why
our
does it have
wealth
to be
stolen.
white with you?
We get our wealth stolen by money printers.
Money
that are
isn't
distributing
wealth.
it for free to everyone.
No, dude, money isn't wealth. Money is a measure of wealth. It's like you're saying, like you're trying to build your thing in the back of your yard, the greenhouse.
The greenhouse.
Yeah, it's saying somebody is stealing your. It'd be like saying an immigrant is stealing the inches because another guy's over there using a ruler to build his thing. It's the same thing.
Going to give JF the last word, and then we definitely have to go into Q&A to read through as many as we can.
I'm being stolen my greenhouse because I'm being self-sufficient. I'm reducing my carbon footprint on the planet, and the government is still taking cash away from me as if I was one of these losers going around town in New York with my car polluting. I'm polluting less. I should be rewarded for this.
Yeah.
Next up, we're going to go into Q&A.
Well, I would be down with that. Why you gotta make it a white thing all the time?
Appreciate your questions, folks. Hate to do that to you, Brenton, but we're going to jump right into it.
That's fine.
Thanks so much to our guests. They are linked in the description, as I had mentioned, folks. So let's jump into these questions. So thanks so much, Joshua Larson, for your super chat, who said, Papier JF1. I don't know what papier means. What does that mean? Please.
Papier is the French for papa. It's the French for daddy.
Okay.
That's weird.
Well, all right. Nathan Thompson, thanks for your super chat, said, the earth is flat. Just wanted to let everybody know that. Stay on topic, guys. Thanks. Okay, well, thank you. Nakamura Hiroshima Honda, thanks for your super chat, said, Brenton, are you using the community mic, bro?
Oh, mic check. I love that. You know what the funny thing is that like people always like on the right will make fun of like DSA folks and stuff and for doing like the up twinkle down twinkle. All of that was actually created at Occupy Wall Street, and it was used because the police would not allow us to use regular microphones. So we had to figure out ways to amplify our voice to show agreement or disagreement and other forms of stuff like a block. it was literally imposed by the NYPD, and this was a very clever way of getting around it. So yeah, I love it when people remember that. It's so much fun to do a mic check.
Gotcha. And thanks so much. It looks like we might be like streaming okay now. Thanks so much, people, for staying with us. I know that the stream has been rough, to say the least. So appreciate your being with us, folks. It's been, hopefully you missed, or hopefully you didn't miss any of the audio, though. It seems like the audio came through, which we're glad. Next up, thanks for your super chat. Said, sounds terrible, but we have stories too. Oh, okay. I think that was during your opening, Brenton.
I'm sure you do have stories. I'd love to hear. Well, no, I'd love to hear some of them if they're good.
Gotcha. Let's see. Thanks for your super chat from T Torchon. Said, you quote, I don't know how to pronounce this, Cerci, Cersei Lannister to
Cersei Lannister.
To xenophobic effect. Then you emote about how, quote, the tribe, unquote, over there isn't always trying to invade. Bro, did you even watch Game of Thrones? It's a spectrum. Some tribes invade more than others.
Yeah, but again, it's Game of Thrones. One, it's fictional. And two, also, I think like the lesson of Game of Thrones is that like the tribes, it's humanity's inability to look past their tribalism and to unite as a species against the looming threat that was the White Walkers. I mean, the ending of it was garbage and the writing was terrible, and D&D plowed headfirst into nothing because they are idiots. But like that's what George R.R. Martin is building to, and that is the lesson of Game of Thrones. So we need to stop fighting over our petty human shit and pay attention as a species, because winter is coming.
Gotcha. Thanks for
this inter-tribe behavior between whites and blacks, and this inability of humans to see themselves as all part of one. Do you see it in a critical fashion when you look at anti-white racism from the black community?
Yes, actually. So I'm a Buddhist, and I believe essentially through Soka Gakkai that as a Nichiren Buddhist, all beings possess the Buddha nature, and this nature can manifest within humans within a single lifetime. What this essentially means is that absolutely every person is infinitely worthy of dignity and respect. Now, sometimes people are sleeping very deeply and you have to do something to prevent them from hurting others. You have to confront slanderers of the Lotus Sutra and of this truth, which is why I take issue with racism. But what I would say is that when someone is expressing genuine anti-white racism, what they're essentially doing is they're trying to dehumanize another person, and that is also a slander of the Lotus Sutra. Now, also sometimes they're criticizing like the concept of whiteness and they're not attaching it to a person, and there's a subtle distinction there. But even that can be dangerous because people can misinterpret it. It's very easy. So I would say, yeah, that sucks. Like, I've lived in Harlem for 10 years and my neighbors are amazing. And, I'm a minority in that neighborhood. Okay. When I, go down to the grocery store, I'm buying my breakfast sandwich from a Muslim. My building is 90% black, and maybe I'd say one time I remember hearing like an elderly woman on the street muttering to herself with like what I would consider actual like anti-white bigotry, where she's like, they're cave dwellers, they're this, and it hurts to hear that. It really does. But what happens is that people get caught in what's called fundamental darkness, where we begin to think of ourselves only as the ego that we experience for, 80 to 90 years on this planet, if we're lucky, and nothing else. And what happens is more
short and pithy, if it's possible.
Yeah, okay, it's a good point. Anyway, basically, yes, I consider that a problem to be dealt with. I don't think it's as bad a problem as racism against minorities, just because there's no institutional force. Like, a cop is not going to kill me because that woman muttered something angrily about me under her breath.
It happened. It
Gotcha.
happened before.
We should keep moving. Opposer of religion, thanks for your super chat, said, lefties unsubbing because their safe space is threatened. To be fair, I think I only saw one person say they're unsubbing, which I would say, folks, if we're going to say, whether you be politically right or left, if we're going to say we're going to be tolerant, like, then, I mean, I don't see how that means you can say, like, okay, well, then this position isn't allowed to come and discuss. Like, To me, it seems like genuine tolerance would be like, okay, well, anybody's able to come on and make their case. So I challenge some of you. If you say you're tolerant, do it all the way. The optimistic pessimist, thanks for your super chat, said, according to Brenton's logic, any category is arbitrary.
Yeah, that's what human brains do. Now, some categories are more arbitrary than others, and there are better reasons to group something into one category or another. The fact is, it's just there's not good reasons to genetically group human taxonomy into races, and that's why no reliable, institution or individual does that.
Gotcha. Thanks so much, and thanks for your super chat from T. Torchan said, nothing hinges on one study. Race in 2020 is called population genetics. Race is a biological fact based on genetic clusters.
That's just not the case.
FST distances, etc.
Yeah, that's just not the case. You're reading pseudoscience. Again, what I would recommend is get your head out of like the alt-right echo chamber and actually talk to some accredited scientists about this. There's plenty of information.
The super chatter is correct in my view.
Yeah, your view, your uneducated view.
Next up, thanks for your super chat, Arcade Outpost, who says, to borrow a bit from RS, when ice cream companies and Sony PlayStation support your riot and the state won't step in to put a hard end to it, you aren't a threat to the system, you are a tool of it.
So let me respond to this also, because there is this really weird thing that I'm seeing where people are thinking that like the far left is beloved by the government. Like I was under Obama, I was occupying Wall Street, and we found like there were literal documents that we got from the Freedom of Information Act that had plans by the FBI to possibly assassinate the leaders of Occupy Wall Street when they came out. We were taken apart by the government. We were taken apart by the state. Michael Bloomberg called the head of the New York Times and got the New York Times to agree to take his side in clearing Zuccotti Park before he did. And then he released police helicopters into the air. He prevented coverage from the ground. So the idea that the left is some sort of tool of the establishment is absolutely ridiculous, especially when it's freaking Trump in power. The fact is that some corporations will try to monetize what they see as a mass movement. For instance, at Occupy, there was a day when a bunch of people showed up, a flash mob, to occupy, extra low prices, and they were paid by corporations to try to co-opt the movement. Another time in the movement, we were offered a bunch of money from Ben and Jerry's to essentially be the voter drive for the Democratic Party and to become the new Tea Party for the Democrats. We refused. And because we would not be bought. And that is why Occupy Wall Street is not a thing like MoveOn.org is today. And why the organizers, a lot of us, just continued to go on to do the work that we're doing. So it's a ridiculous accusation.
Gotcha.
I often hear that from communists these days. They equate corporations, therefore not leftism. But I will point out that leftism is progressing in this country. It is both invading corporations and non-profits and the government. And ultimately, what we have is a greater and greater share of the GDP, which is occupied by government-controlled entities, whether they are private or public. To me, it doesn't really matter. They are non-consensual. That's what matters.
I mean, so by like the left progressing, essentially you're talking about like progressive movements and progressive ideals. That's just nature. Like the right always loses to the left given a long enough time because tradition is always destroyed by progress. There's absolutely nothing anyone can do about that. And like, you just got to get comfortable with it because,
From this view, the left also ends up destroying itself and eventually wanting to go live among where the right-wingers flew. Last time they flew to the United States and the communists came to the United States a couple of
there were communists in the United
after.
States well beforehand.
Yeah, but somehow they didn't have power.
They had a lot of power.
This constitution.
Freaking Eugene Debs, man.
Sorry, we must keep moving pretty quick here.
Okay. Yeah.
Citizen, thanks for your... I hate to do that to you guys. I'm sorry. These are interesting
it's all right.
Citizen Olympic, thanks for your super chat, said, Brenton, if race is not real, would you agree to do a live stream of you going into the ghetto at night with a wallet full of cash and your most expensive camera to tell everybody the good news?
I mean, so first off, I would be fine going into the ghetto or a majority black area. I'd be a little worried in certain neighborhoods just because, there are areas like I wouldn't want to be around a bunch of poor white people either, because the fact of the matter is that like poverty pushes crime. Now, am I going to go up to like a bunch of people and be like, hey, good news, race isn't real? No, who does that? What kind of freaking weirdo goes around yelling that at everybody? But at the same time, if you're asking me, like, would I be comfortable being around black people? Yes, because I lived in Harlem for 10 freaking years. I lived in Sugar Hill. So, yeah, like, that's fine. It's not actually dangerous.
Gotcha. Thanks for your... I forgot to mention, we do have some new subscribers. I think I might have missed one or two. Sorry about that, but I saw them pop up on the screen. The Traditionalist, thanks for subscribing. The New Soul Sam, appreciate it. Glad to have you here. Welcome to the community. Boats Wayne Bill, appreciate your subscribing. And The Boggle, thanks for subscribing.
Awesome.
Glad you have you a part of the community. Next up, thanks for your... Oh, did I say it wrong?
It's pronounced Bosun.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And the Gray Brain Zero, thanks for your super chat, said, Brenton, do you think it's just a coincidence that every starting cornerback in the NFL is black?
No, that's not a coincidence. It's an effect of racism. When sports are more objective than other fields of study. So for instance, figure skating. The performance of figure skaters is more subjective than the performance of a quarterback. So what happens is you got two factors happening here. One, you have social forces pushing black people towards athletics because this is one of the places where racism means the least. And then two, because they're getting pushed in that direction towards athletics, you have the perception that black people are really good at athletics. So then the rest of society creates a feedback loop and pushes more people in that direction. Also, they have less opportunity overall than white people. So obviously they get clustered in one or two or three professions. The fact that black people excel in the arts and excel in certain forms of the arts and excel in athletics is a direct result of racism and racial discrimination.
Gotcha. And
imagine having all these hoops and twists in your mind rather than just knowing they're
called
just
being
better
smart.
at it because of their genes.
No, it's called being smart and being able to look at the problem from a bunch of different directions and figure out exactly what's going on. You don't have any subtlety.
Next up, thanks for...
I think you're too smart at this point, but go ahead.
No, I'm definitely too smart, and sometimes I forget to put on pants.
Thanks for subscribing, Dr. Frost. Just saw you joined. Welcome to the community. And next up, thanks for your super chat from Raven Zero, who said, Brandon, are you okay? Let's see.
Brandon?
No, it's like they're purposely using... Okay, so let's see. Gray Brain Zero... Oh, we got that one. Skeptic Wiz, thanks for your super chat, said, love when you have blood sports here. Great debate. Glad you enjoyed it. All credit to the speakers. Dylan Grappy, thanks for your super chat, said, very entertaining debate. Glad you enjoyed it. Again, appreciate these guys for being on. They're both linked in the description. Weasel, thanks for your super chat, said, just a thanks to James for hosting such a difficult topic. This is, yeah, sometimes we get a little flack for these, but glad you enjoyed it. I think that hopefully there's fruit that comes out of it. T Torchon, thanks for your super chat, said, Brenton, what would a host if meta studies need to show to change your mind on race? Can you even articulate it?
I mean, so first off, this is outside of my wheelhouse. If you wanted me to change my mind on race, you would have to have the scientific consensus change on race. So you would have what individual studies would have to show is not something that I or JF are really educated to know for sure. But what we are both educated, at least far enough in, is the ability to, well, me at least, I don't know why he's not doing it, but to properly judge and vet sources. So, the thing is that if the scientific consensus changed with regard to race, I would change with the scientific consensus.
Gotcha. And thanks so much for your super chat from Raven Zero, said, so right now, stores of working people are getting destroyed. Most of these acts are done by black folks. Do we giving free pass or punish them? Do we give them a free pass or punish them? Is that racist?
I mean, I would say both to a certain extent. The thing is that these stores are getting destroyed and looted as a result. You know, as Martin Luther King famously said, a riot is the cry of the unheard. Crime oftentimes can be it serves the social purpose of showing people where there's a problem. And the problem at this point has gotten so big that we've broken out into riots. And in a lot of ways that this becomes like almost like a natural disaster, like a hurricane or a tsunami, except instead of involving weather or waves, it involves people. So what I would say is, with regards to this, if people get caught while they're rioting or looting or doing something wrong, you know, they should be tried and punished, and maybe we go a little bit lighter on them to take extenuating circumstances into account, or we offer them probation or something, or not probation, but early release for good behavior if they pay their debt to society. But at the same time, we need to take this as a wake-up call. These are underserved communities, and nothing is going to be solved by deploying more force and punishment against them. They've already had that. They've had that for centuries now. Right. So I really think, like, if you raise their quality of life, people aren't going to want to riot. Nobody riots when they have a stake in the neighborhood, when they own the property there. You know, so give them a stake.
Gotcha.
The communist is folding in front of extortion. What he's saying, essentially, Brenton, is just trash my nation and I will pay you until you stop trashing my nation.
No, I'm saying I don't care who started it. You know, it's the same thing when people get into it. I don't care who started it. This is a problem. Let's fix the problem. Now, you also do need to, for the sake of consistency, punish the lawbreakers who get caught. You know, you just need to do that. If I was a police officer, I'd have to do that. If, you know, I might feel bad about it, but I still would, because that's my job.
Gotcha. Thanks for your super chat from Robert Luscombe. Says, James, when will you host the show shirtless? Gotcha. Nasty guy. Thanks, Robert. You can see we'll read anything here. Next up, Weasel. Thanks for your super chat. Said, Brenton, you're cute, but so very extreme. You've got, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. Thank you for telling me that I'm rad and cool. I like to be a little far out as an artist and a philosopher. Like, we have to stand outside of society. You know, in another, I might have been a shaman in like a pre-state civilization, but, you know, since I'm not, I'm, you know, in this society, I'm like making comics and novels and talking politics and philosophy. You don't have to agree with everything that I have to say. But what I would think is that the perspective that I have is one that's important to hear, or at least I hope is important to hear.
Gotcha. And thanks for your super chat. Appreciate it. From Weasel said, all cultures, Brenton, even the spiders people kill. What are the spiders people?
Spiders don't have culture. That's just like, what?
Gotcha. And Nimsum, thanks for your super chat, said, you say you're tolerant, yet I haven't seen one Sith on the show yet. It's just an inside joke from something we used to say.
Oh.
But I appreciate the Star Wars reference. Jay Galt 1776, thanks for your super chat, said, the worst pathology of the leftist is their quest to destroy the most important type of diversity, cognitive diversity.
Oh, that's idiotic. I mean, so first off, like, what do you mean cognitive diversity? Like, the fact of the matter is that usually in this society, the dumber people tend to prosper a little bit more than the smarter people. And we've even seen studies like this where actually being smart and having a high IQ, you are actually less likely to get into top institutions and to get into high paying jobs than if you come from a rich family. The fact of the matter is that humans function on heavily, what's the word, where you bring in your where you give the job to your cousin. We tend to nepotism. Thank you. Yeah, it's a highly nepotistic system that we have right now, and like, I mean, that's perhaps partially how we organize naturally because of Dunbar's number, and we can only recognize 150 or so individuals. But the fact is, capitalism does not reward the best and the brightest. It just rewards the jackass who can pay for something.
Well, that was not the super chat. The super chat was not about wealth. It was about cognitive diversity and ultimately this problem that leftists take with someone having racial preferences. That's what
But there's no link between race and IQ.
No, we're not talking about IQ here. What if someone has a racial preference? What if someone wants to date people from their own race? We have a discourse in the social media right now on the left that says that's a problem. We need to combat it.
Cognitive. You're talking about ideological diversity.
No, it is a form of cognitive diversity because racial preference is part of the human mind. It's part of what the mind does.
I mean, in the sense that everything that happens in the mind is part of what the mind does. I mean, if you've got a hang up or a fetish about who you want to date, I don't have a problem with it. You can date whoever you want to date. Like, yeah. I mean, like if you're sitting there and you're like super racist and you're like, I don't want to date black people because they're gross. Well, I'd say, maybe think about that a little bit because, you kind of sound like you might have some issues you got to deal with. But no, I mean, I don't have a problem with people thinking differently. Oftentimes they'll be like, if the left attacks people for not having the same opinion. The left doesn't attack people for liking pineapple on pizza. It's very specific things left takes issue with.
Next up, thanks for your super chat from T. Torchun said, JF, how do we get away from these people as fast as possible? I'm ready to be a White Walker and walk the F out. They will never be satisfied. What is a White Walker?
It's from Game of Thrones.
Someone who lives in the north in Lord's Game of Thrones, So we need to flee away from the communists so far that the drive, they won't make it to even come to us. And so I'm recommending 25 hours minimum from any communist city, 24-hour of car.
You're going to have a very hard time getting away from people like me because I'm going to tell you, I'm an Appalachian Trail 2,000 miler. I've walked 2,000 miles. I've lived in the woods for 6 months straight.
Can you do that at minus 50 degrees Celsius?
Yeah, with the right equipment, absolutely. I lead like international adventure trips to like frickin' Iceland and places. I've dealt with extreme environments.
Then I'll be adding spikes to my greenhouse.
Not going to mess with your greenhouse, dude.
Thomas,
I'm a teddy bear.
Thomas Howard, thanks for your super chat, said, genetics based on race can be observed medically in HLA matches necessary for viable organ and bone marrow transplantation. Inform yourself.
No, again, there are matches that scientists have until recently thought were more common with race or not. But again, I had this quote here. Where is it? Yeah. Racial pharmacogenicals fail in efficacy and safety. So if you try to make medical decisions on someone based upon race without taking the other data into consideration, it's very, very dangerous.
Gotcha. And thanks for your super chat from Dr. Frost, who says, as a Buddhist, are you vegan?
No, I'm not vegan. I know there are a lot of Buddhists that are vegan, and I have thought about vegetarianism, but Nichiren Buddhism does not put a huge emphasis on vegetarianism, and I don't see any reason necessarily to do it within the context of the Lotus Sutra.
Gotcha. And also, forgot to mention, Scott Shane, thanks for subscribing. Glad to have you here. And Robert Lescombe, thanks for your super chat, said, Brenton, you refused Ben & Jerry's?
I've never refused Ben & Jerry's ice cream. We did refuse Ben & Jerry's money.
Gotcha. T. Torchun, thanks for your super chat, said, by not looting, you are being racist. Show support.
What?
Gotcha.
He's trolling.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure he's trolling.
Sorry, Poe's Law.
Appreciate your super chat from Dylan Grappy, who says, everyone be sure to read, quote, Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. That's not the name of it, is it? Is that the name of it?
Yeah, that's the name of my comic series.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, you got a fan out there then. And thanks for your super chat from Chronic Boom, says, hi, JF, and then sends another super chat saying, Brendan says, 1, only go by the scientific consensus. 2, vet every single paper. If the consensus were changing one paper at a time, at what point would Brendan change his mind? 51% say race is real.
Yeah. Okay. So what you've done here, this is the problem of how many grains of sand make a pile. We know that a pile exists, but how many grains of sand is it? Is it one? Is it two? Is it three? Is it four? Is it five? Where is the exact grains of sand? This is just a ridiculous non-statement. It's playing with the concept of pile and the concept of consensus.
Gotcha. And let's see, we have one question from Doubting Thomas. This is the very start. Said, question for Brenton. Why are Asians arrested at lower rates than black people?
Oh, because what happened was after World War II, the United States government put a lot of effort and propaganda into making Asians into the model minority. So there, you can actually go back and look at the propaganda that was put out prior to that propaganda campaign, that blitz in the United States. They were considered to be in much the same way that people think about like black people and stuff today. And by people, I mean idiots.
Gotcha.
Or Asians are getting arrested less because they commit less crime. Have you studied this hypothesis?
Well, again, what you're doing right with that is you're using accusations essentially as your crime data. So the people that say, oh, it was a black guy or oh, it was an Asian guy. And again, focusing on poverty. Now, also, Asians tend to be in less poverty and poor people tend to commit more crimes. So what usually happens with regard to that is it's a statistical anomaly. Again, average American has one breast and one testicle. Doesn't mean anything.
Let's see, we will give the last word to Brenton on that because I think it was a challenge to him. So with that, we will say, I think we have one more super chat that just flew in. Horatius, thanks for your super chat. Said Dalai Lama stated Europe is for Europeans. Racist?
Yes, and also I'm not a follower of the Dalai Lama. He says some good stuff, but again, I'm a Nichiren Buddhist, not a Tibetan Buddhist.
Gotcha. So, I want to say thanks so much, everybody, for hanging out with us tonight, especially through that rotten early part of the stream with the 99% of our frames dropping. But this has been a true pleasure to have these guys on. We really appreciate them. They're linked in the description, folks. So if you're listening and you're like, I want more, you can hear more by clicking those links. So one last thanks so much. Appreciate it. Brenton and JF, we appreciate you guys being here.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So with that, folks, keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. We will be back this Thursday with a debate on whether or not Trump handled COVID well. And then Friday, we will have Matt Dillahunty and Randall Rouser in a tag team match with their respective partners, Tom Jump and Samuel Nassan, on whether or not there's sufficient evidence for God. Chronic Boom, thanks for your last super chat, said, thank you for the sand analogy. That clarifies everything. I think they're maybe being, I can't tell if they're being sincere or sarcastic.
Yeah, well, either way, it is an answer to that. It's like when they say, like, when you say how much exactly is someone's fair share, they're just playing with the fact that there's a lot of concepts that people think are part of like actual physical reality that simply are not.
Gotcha. And thanks so much, folks. Appreciate it. Toy Insanity and Cato, thanks for subbing. We hope you guys have a great night. Keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable.